The fashion models I was interviewing tried to publicly humiliate me. They didn't know I was the one hiring them. I walked onto my brand's casting set pretending to be a hopeful model because I wanted to see what these girls were like to each other. Instantly, the models looked me up and down with contempt, and a girl named Anna immediately announced I must be confused because this wasn't an open call for cheap catalog work. Before I could respond, her friend Krista laughed and said, "Did you seriously show up to cast for Eden Laurent without even getting your roots done? Because that grow out is giving single mom who gave up." I touched my deliberately unstyled hair and mumbled something about not having time, already shocked at how quickly they'd gone for the jugular. Anna grabbed my portfolio and flipped through the test shots I'd taken with bad lighting on purpose, holding each one up while providing commentary about how my poses looked awful and my angles made my face look like a potato. She asked if I'd learned to model from America's Next Top Model reruns, and Krista snorted, saying, "This is the casting that makes careers. Every girl who's booked Eden Laurent has gone straight to Chanel and Dior, and you thought you could just show up looking like that?" I mentally crossed Anna off my list right then, knowing I'd never let someone this cruel represent my brand. They made me walk for them, and Anna filmed it while narrating like a nature documentary about a baby giraffe learning to use its legs. Krista stepped on the backs of my heels so I'd stumble, then told everyone I couldn't even walk in flats. Another model named Louise joined them saying, "Eden Laurent is launching in every major department store next month with a Times Square billboard. Whoever books this is set for life, and you're here wasting everyone's time." Anna noticed my dress and announced I was wearing Target to an Eden Laurent casting, which was like wearing a garbage bag to the Met Gala. Krista added that Eden had turned down actual supermodels for not being right for her vision, and I had to bite my cheek because I'd never turned down Kara and these girls were just making stuff up. Then they got physical with Anna grabbing my waist and pinching hard while explaining I'd need to lose 15 pounds for runway. Krista lifted my arm and jiggled it, announcing my arm fat would destroy their aesthetic. Louise pushed my shoulders back so hard I almost fell, saying, "This campaign is shooting with Mario Testino in Paris for every fashion magazine in existence, and you can't even stand up straight." The second Krista touched me without permission, she was off my list too. Krista was gesturing wildly when she accidentally spilled her green juice all over my dress, gasping that she was so sorry, but honestly she'd done me a favor because now I had an excuse to leave. Anna offered clothes from her bag, pulling out a dress 3 sizes too small and insisting I try squeezing into it. Louise started listing all the major models who'd worked with Eden before, asking if I really thought I belonged with Gigi and Bella and Kendall when I looked like I should be modeling for grocery store circulars. Anna pulled up Eden's Instagram with its 2 million followers showing the last campaign, saying, "Eden handpicks every single face and she turned down Cara Delevingne last season, but you somehow think you're going to make the cut?" I stared at my own Instagram page on her phone, fighting the urge to tell them right then. They formed a circle and took turns destroying every part of my appearance, from my uneven eyebrows to my chipped nail polish to my legs being too short for editorial. Anna said I had the kind of face that would tank Eden's IPO, and Krista added that putting me in an Eden Laurent dress would be like letting a toddler paint over the Mona Lisa. Then Louise delivered the line that made me bite my lip until it bled. "You don't understand that booking Eden Laurent means never having to work. Again, it's the golden ticket to everything in fashion, and you're here thinking you deserve it when you look like you buy your makeup at CVS." The casting director walked in, and the models immediately transformed into perfect professionals, but she looked past them directly at me, and her face went white as she stammered, "Miss Laurent, I didn't know you were coming in person today." And I stood up from where they'd cornered me, green juice still dripping from my ruined dress, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Actually, I've been here for an hour learning exactly what kind of people we don't want representing our brand." Anna's phone slipped from her frozen fingers and shattered on the floor, while Krista's mouth hung open mid-breath, and Louise's face drained of all color as they stared at me, finally understanding that they'd just destroyed their only chance at the career they'd been dreaming about. But the best part, they still had to cast in front of me, and that was about to be a whole lot of fun. I let the silence stretch out for exactly 3 seconds, while the 3 of them stood there frozen like mannequins in a store window. The casting director started to speak, but I held up my hand and turned to Anna, Krista, and Louise, who were still standing in the exact spots where they'd been tormenting me 60 seconds ago. I picked up the clipboard from the table and clicked my pen open with a sharp snap that made all 3 of them flinch. "Since you're already here, you'll complete your casting walks," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and professional. Anna's face went from white to red to white again in the span of 2 heartbeats. Her hands started shaking so hard she dropped her portfolio, and papers scattered across the floor. She bent down to grab them, but her fingers wouldn't work right and she kept missing the pages. Krista tried to help her but knocked over her own bag in the process, sending lipsticks and compacts rolling everywhere. Louise just stood there with her mouth hanging open like she'd forgotten how to close it. The casting director moved toward the door, but I shook my head slightly and she stopped mid-step. "Anna, you're first," I said, pointing to the runway marks on the floor. She looked at the straight line she'd mocked me for struggling with, and her legs started trembling, so badly I could see it through her skinny jeans. She took 1 step and her ankle rolled in her heel. She caught herself but overcorrected and stumbled to the left. The second step wasn't much better, and by the third, she was walking like someone had replaced her kneecaps with jello. She tried to do the pivot turn at the end, but forgot which way to turn and ended up doing this awkward shuffle that looked nothing like the confident strut she'd had 5 minutes ago. I made notes on my clipboard with the same critical expression she'd worn. While filming me, writing things like lacks basic coordination and unable to maintain straight line. She tripped over her own feet twice on the way back, catching herself on the wall the second time. Her face was now the color of a tomato, and sweat was starting to bead on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "Thank you, Anna. Next," I said, without looking up from my notes. Krista stepped forward, but her whole body was shaking like she'd been dunked in ice water. She tried to start her first pose, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling, and it looked less like modeling and more like she was having some kind of medical episode. The green juice stain on my dress caught the studio lights every time she glanced my way, which was every 2 seconds, and each time she looked, she'd lose her concentration and forget what she was doing. She attempted a hair flip, but her hand got tangled and she spent 5 seconds trying to pull it free. Her signature pose, the one I'd seen her practice earlier while waiting, completely fell apart when she couldn't remember which leg went forward. She tried 3 different versions, and each one looked worse than the last. By the time she reached the end of the runway, she'd completely forgotten her final pose and just stood there with her arms hanging at her sides like wet noodles. "Noted," I said, scribbling more observations about her complete lack of professional composure. Louise couldn't even make eye contact when I called her name. She stared at the floor like a kid who'd been caught stealing candy and shuffled forward with her shoulders hunched so far forward she looked like she was trying to fold herself in half. The same shoulders she'd pushed mine back with were now curved inward in total defeat. When she tried to state her name and agency for the slate introduction, her voice came out as this tiny mumble that nobody could understand. She had to repeat it 3 times, and even then it sounded like she was talking through a mouthful of cotton. Her walk was more of a shuffle, her feet barely lifting off the ground. Nothing like the confident stride she'd demonstrated earlier when she was explaining how models who book Eden Laurent are set for life. She made it halfway down the runway before she stopped completely, just standing there like she'd forgotten where she was or what she was supposed to be doing. After 10 seconds of painful silence, I cleared my throat and she jerked back into motion, practically running to the end and back. They stood there in a line when they finished, looking nothing like the confident, cruel girls who'd spent an hour destroying me. Anna kept touching her shattered phone screen, cutting her finger on the glass. Krista's makeup was starting to run from the sweat. Louise was blinking rapidly like she was trying not to cry. "We'll be in touch," I said, using the exact phrase they'd been so desperate to hear just minutes before. They gathered their bags in complete silence, none of them able to look at each other or me. Anna tried to pick up her phone, but her hands were shaking too badly, and it slipped again, the screen cracking even more. Krista grabbed 3 lipsticks off the floor and shoved them in her bag without checking if they were even hers. Louise just clutched her portfolio to her chest like it was a shield. The second the door closed behind them, the casting director rushed over to me, her face pale and her hands wringing together. She started apologizing immediately, saying she should have been monitoring the waiting area better, that this was completely unacceptable, that she'd never seen anything like this happen before. I held up my hand to stop her mid-sentence. "This isn't your fault," I told her, setting down the clipboard. "But we need to talk about new protocols for model behavior during castings." She nodded so fast I thought her head might fall off and pulled out her tablet to take notes. I asked her to compile a list of every model who'd been kind to the PA today, anyone who'd treated others with respect during the session. She scrolled through her notes and started highlighting names, telling me about a girl who'd helped another model with her zipper, another who'd shared her water bottle when someone forgot theirs. These were the people I actually wanted to consider for my campaign, not the ones who thought cruelty was the price of success. "Scarlett Dubois," I said, remembering the newer model who'd offered me tissues to clean the juice stain earlier when everyone else was laughing. The casting director's face lit up, and she immediately called Scarlett back in from the hallway where she was waiting. Scarlett walked in looking confused but professional, her posture perfect but not rigid. "You've made it to callbacks," I told her, watching her eyes widen in genuine surprise. "Based on how you treated someone you thought had no power." She started to say something but just nodded instead, a real smile spreading across her face, not the fake model smile but actual happiness. After she left, I pulled out my phone and texted Celine Fontana, our head of PR, that we needed an emergency meeting tonight. I attached the photo I'd taken of my stained dress, the green juice still visible against the fabric. We needed to control this narrative before Anna, Krista, and Louise tried to spin it their way. Within seconds, Celine texted back that she'd clear her schedule and meet me at the office. I grabbed my ruined dress and headed to our offices 12 blocks away, not bothering to change because I wanted my team to see exactly what had happened. The Eden Laurent offices took up the entire 15th floor of a building overlooking Central Park, all glass and white marble and modern art. I walked past the reception area and straight to the main conference room where I sent out a group text for an immediate meeting. My sister Gabriella arrived first, her eyes going straight to the giant green stain on my dress. Behind her came Celine, then our creative director, our head of casting, and 3 other senior team members. Once everyone was seated, I pulled out my phone and connected it to the conference room screen. Before I explain what happened today, I need you all to see something, I said, finding the video Anna had taken of me walking. I'd made her airdrop it to me before she left, telling her I needed it for my records. The video started playing on the giant screen, Anna's cruel narration filling the room as she compared my walk to a baby giraffe learning to use its legs. My team sat in stunned silence watching the whole thing, their faces getting more shocked with each passing second. When it ended, Gabriella was gripping the edge of the table, so hard her knuckles were white. Laptop open on the conference table, Celine was already typing notes about damage control, while our creative director kept rewinding the video to watch specific moments of cruelty again. I pulled up my phone to check Instagram and saw 3 DMs from models at the casting asking if something bad had happened, because Anna, Krista, and Louise had left looking destroyed. Within an hour, Celine showed me her monitoring dashboard, where fashion Twitter was starting to buzz with vague posts about drama at the Eden Laurent casting, though nobody had specifics yet. She'd already drafted 3 different response strategies depending on how the story broke, each one focused on our commitment to professional standards without naming anyone. The next morning, their agency booker called my assistant 4 times before I finally picked up, and he immediately launched into how Anna, Krista, and Louise were 3 of his top earners who'd booked major campaigns for Versace and Prada. I stayed quiet while he listed every brand they'd worked for, every magazine cover they'd shot, every designer who loved them. He mentioned his other models too, the ones we'd definitely want for future campaigns, suggesting it would be unfortunate if our relationship with his entire agency suffered over one misunderstanding. I told him there was no misunderstanding, and we had video evidence of assault when Krista deliberately spilled juice on me, plus witness statements from the PA, the stylist, and 2 other models who saw everything. His tone shifted immediately to damage control mode, promising the girls wanted to apologize properly and make things right. That afternoon, Krista's apology email arrived. 3 paragraphs about how her anxiety made her act out, and the juice spill was completely accidental because she'd been gesturing with her hands. I pulled up the security footage on my computer showing her deliberately tilting her cup while looking directly at me, then saved both files in the same folder for comparison. Anna's letter came next, calling her behavior competitive energy that got out of hand, never once acknowledging she'd physically pinched me hard enough to leave marks. Louise wrote the shortest apology, 2 sentences about being caught up in the moment and hoping we could move forward professionally. I printed all 3 letters and laid them next to the witness statements from the PA, who described them circling me like predators, the stylist who heard them making up lies about Kara, and another model who saw Krista step on my heels on purpose. The inconsistencies were obvious, with none of them taking real responsibility for the physical assault or the deliberate cruelty. 3 days later, the agency booker showed up at our office without an appointment, wearing a designer suit and carrying a portfolio of his biggest names. He spread photos across my desk of supermodels we'd definitely want to work with, reminding me that his agency controlled access to some of the most famous faces in fashion. I pushed the photos back toward him and explained that Eden Laurent's standards weren't negotiable regardless of who he represented. He leaned forward, saying he'd hate for word to get out that we were difficult to work with, that we created drama where none existed. Amelia, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner taking notes, stood up and reminded him that defamation has serious legal consequences, and we had extensive documentation including video evidence of assault. She pulled out printed screenshots of the model's own social media posts from that day, proving they were at the casting when they later claimed to barely remember being there. The booker's face got red as he realized we'd been thoroughly preparing our case, and he switched tactics to negotiating terms. I laid out our position clearly that Anna, Krista, and Louise were banned from this campaign and any Eden Laurent work for the next year, but they could reapply after completing professional development training and providing references from other jobs showing changed behavior. He tried arguing that a year was excessive for what he called youthful mistakes, but I pointed out that physically assaulting someone and lying about it afterward weren't mistakes but choices. Meanwhile, Celine had been tracking online chatter and showed me a fashion blog post titled, "Drama at Eden Laurent Casting Has Models Talking," with no real details but lots of speculation in the comments. She'd prepared a statement about our commitment to maintaining professional standards and creating safe working environments for everyone, carefully worded to address the situation without naming individuals. We posted it on our official channels, and within hours the response was overwhelmingly positive, with models sharing their own stories about toxic casting experiences. Industry professionals started commenting that it was about time brands took stands against bullying behavior, and several smaller agencies reached out saying they appreciated our position. I called an all-hands meeting for our entire team that afternoon, gathering everyone from junior designers to senior management in the main conference room. Without naming the 3 models, I explained what had happened and why it mattered that our brand represent beauty inside and out, not just perfect cheekbones and designer connections. The team unanimously agreed that talent without kindness wasn't worth featuring, and our junior designer suggested we make respect and professionalism part of our official model selection criteria going forward. That night, I sat at my desk drafting a personal statement about what happened, typing out every detail about how Anna, Krista, and Louise treated me during the casting. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I described the pinching, the pushing, the juice spill, wanting everyone to know exactly what these models were really like behind their perfect Instagram feeds. I sent the draft to Amelia, who called me back within minutes saying we needed to meet immediately about potential legal issues. She arrived at my apartment with her laptop and a stack of legal precedents, spreading papers across my dining table while explaining that naming the models directly could open us up to defamation lawsuits, even though everything I wrote was true. We spent 3 hours revising the statement, removing their names and shifting the focus from calling out individuals to promoting positive change in the industry. Amelia rewrote problematic sections while I paced around my living room, frustrated that we couldn't just tell the truth plainly, but understanding the legal realities. The final version talked about witnessing unprofessional behavior and using it as motivation to create better standards without mentioning anyone specifically. The next morning, our team gathered in the conference room where I presented the model code of conduct we'd been working on all night. The document outlined specific expectations about treating everyone with respect, zero tolerance for bullying, and consequences for violations, including immediate dismissal from castings. We printed copies on heavy cardstock, and Gabriella suggested laminating them to post at every entrance to our casting spaces. The facilities team installed holders by each door that afternoon, while I watched them mount the signs at eye level where no one could miss them. We added a signature requirement to our casting registration, making models acknowledge they'd read and understood the code before they could even enter the room. Our legal team created a simple one-page form that models would sign along with their standard casting paperwork. The callback process needed restructuring too, so we designed a 5-minute orientation that would happen before any model stepped in front of our panel. Our casting coordinator prepared a brief presentation about our values and expectations, practicing it until she could deliver it naturally without sounding preachy. We scheduled these orientations in small groups so models would hear the message together, creating peer accountability from the start. Gabriella pulled me aside with an idea that would completely change how we evaluate talent. She proposed blind first rounds where we'd watch models walk and pose without seeing their social media numbers, agency rankings, or any of the metrics that usually influence decisions. We'd focus purely on their presence, movement, and how they carried our clothes without knowing if they had 10,000 or 10 million followers. The tech team worked overnight to create a system that would assign numbers instead of names for the first round, keeping all identifying information hidden until after initial selections. We'd only learn who they were after deciding based solely on talent and how they treated our staff during check-in. I loved this approach because it removed all the bias about who was supposedly important in the industry. We decided to test the new system with a smaller casting for our resort collection the following week. Only 20 models showed up, but the atmosphere was completely different from any casting I'd ever attended. During the orientation, models actually asked questions about our values and seemed genuinely interested in being part of something positive. In the waiting area, I watched through security cameras as models helped each other with poses instead of treating each other like competition. One girl's zipper broke and 3 others immediately offered safety pins and helped her fix it. Another model shared her powder compact when someone realized she'd forgotten hers. The blind selection process worked perfectly with our team choosing models based purely on how they moved and presented our clothes. When we revealed the names afterward, we'd picked several newer models over established ones with bigger followings, proving that talent mattered more than Instagram fame. My phone rang that evening with a call from a model who was withdrawing her application for our main campaign callbacks. She explained that she'd heard about drama at our casting and didn't want to get involved in anything messy. I asked her to give me 5 minutes to explain what really happened and our new approach. I told her about our code of conduct, the blind first rounds, and our commitment to creating a different kind of environment without mentioning the specific incident with Anna, Krista, and Louise. She listened quietly, then said she'd never heard of a brand taking these issues seriously before. By the end of our conversation, she was not only back in, but excited about being part of something that could change the industry. The next day, our senior designer burst into my office with mood boards under his arm and a huge smile on his face. He spread the boards across my desk, showing a completely reimagined creative direction that celebrated authenticity and kindness instead of the cold, distant luxury we'd originally planned. The new concept featured behind-the-scenes moments of models supporting each other, laughing together, helping with outfit changes, and being real people instead of untouchable figures. We'd show the beauty of collaboration and friendship in fashion, making our brand about more than just expensive clothes. The team gathered around the boards, pointing at different shots and getting excited about this fresh approach that felt more genuine to who we were as a company. We spent the afternoon updating the campaign concept, adding shots of models doing each other's makeup, sharing accessories, and even eating lunch together between shots. Our photographer loved the idea, saying it would create more natural, engaging images than the typical serious fashion poses. We drafted a formal notice to send to all agencies about our new code, process, and the consequences for violations. Amelia reviewed every word to make sure we were legally protected while being clear about our expectations. The notice explained that any model who violated our standards would be dismissed immediately, and their agency would be notified of the reason. We also included information about the blind first rounds and our focus on character alongside talent. Most agencies responded within hours, saying it was about time someone took a stand against toxic behavior in the industry. Several smaller agencies thanked us personally for creating safer spaces for their models. The night before callbacks, our entire team stayed late doing a final run-through of the new process. We practiced the orientation speech, tested the blind selection system, and assigned staff members as witnesses to monitor all interactions in waiting areas and hallways. Everyone knew their role, from the security guards who would watch for any bullying to the assistants who would document any incidents. I walked through the facility checking that our code of conduct signs were visible everywhere, and that we had cameras covering all common areas. We were ready to show the fashion world that success didn't require cruelty, and that kindness could be just as powerful as killer cheekbones. The next morning, I arrived at the studio 2 hours early to watch the models arrive and check that our new signs were visible everywhere. Groups of 10 started filing in for their callback slots, and I stood at the front of each group holding our printed code of conduct while reading the key points out loud. The models nodded along, and several actually smiled when I mentioned the part about supporting each other during the process. The atmosphere felt completely different from our usual castings, with models actually talking to each other instead of sizing up the competition. I watched them help each other with outfit adjustments and share makeup tips while waiting for their turns. Our staff members positioned throughout the space took notes on every interaction, and I saw several models offer water bottles to others who forgot theirs. Then at 11:30, Anna walked through the door with Krista and Louise right behind her, followed by a man in an expensive suit who had to be their agent. They approached the desk asking to speak with me privately before the callbacks, and I agreed to meet with each model separately in the conference room. Anna came first and sat across from me with her hands folded while I pulled out a folder containing witness statements from the PA, the stylist, and 3 other models who saw what happened. I showed her the security footage on my laptop of Krista deliberately spilling the juice and her own video she'd taken while mocking my walk. She stared at the evidence without speaking as I explained she wouldn't be in this campaign, but could reapply next season after completing professional development training and providing references showing changed behavior. Her face went red and she started to argue, but I held up the printed screenshots of her Instagram stories from that day, where she'd posted about some wannabe embarrassing herself at the Eden Laurent casting. Krista came next and tried to claim the juice spill was an accident until I showed her the footage from 3 different angles, clearly showing her moving her arm intentionally. She broke down crying, saying she needed this job to pay for her apartment, and I reminded her that she should have thought about that before physically assaulting someone she thought had no power. Louise was the most defensive, insisting that competition was normal in the industry and everyone did it, but I pulled up testimonials from 12 models describing how she'd bullied them at various castings over the past year. Their agent stormed in after I'd finished with all 3, demanding to know what authority I had to ban his clients from the campaign. He threatened to pull all his other models from consideration and prevent any of his talent from working with Eden Laurent in the future. I stayed calm and explained that we'd rather have a smaller pool of models who treated people with respect than work with agencies that enabled bullying and assault. He said we'd regret this decision when we couldn't book any top models, but I showed him our list of confirmed callbacks, which included several girls from better agencies who'd already signed our code of conduct. After they left, Celine sent out our official statement to fashion media, announcing Eden Laurent's new model code of conduct and commitment to professional behavior, without mentioning any names. Within an hour, we had responses from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and WWD, praising the initiative and asking for interviews about the new standards. Models started posting about it on social media with the hashtag kindness in fashion, trending by the afternoon. We spent the rest of the day reviewing callbacks, and I personally selected Scarlett Dubois, who'd offered me tissues for the juice stain, along with 5 other models who'd shown genuine warmth during the casting process. They screamed with excitement when we called them, and Scarlett actually cried, saying she'd never booked a major campaign before, but always tried to stay positive and kind, even when others weren't. 2 weeks later, we flew to Paris for the campaign shoot, and from the moment we arrived at the studio, the energy was incredible. The models were helping each other with poses, fixing each other's hair between shots, and genuinely laughing together during breaks. Mario Testino pulled me aside on the second day, saying he'd never seen models work together like this, and the chemistry was showing in every frame. He said most fashion shoots felt cold and competitive, but this felt like photographing actual friends having fun together. The behind-the-scenes footage we captured showed models sharing their lunch, teaching each other phrases in different languages, and even doing each other's makeup when the artists took breaks. Fashion blogs started picking up the story after Celine released some behind-the-scenes photos with captions about our new approach. Style.com called it a revolutionary step for an industry plagued by toxic behavior and asked if other brands would follow our lead. Several smaller brands reached out asking for copies of our code of conduct and advice on implementing similar standards. Then the agency sent a formal letter through their lawyers claiming we'd discriminated against their models and damaged their reputation with unsubstantiated allegations. Amelia responded with our own letter, including the witness statements, security footage, and documentation of the assault, making it clear we had extensive evidence of everything that happened. They tried to negotiate for a quiet settlement if we'd let the models participate in future campaigns, but Amelia shut that down immediately. After 3 weeks of back and forth, they finally dropped the matter when they realized we weren't backing down, and their own models were starting to ask questions about the agency's practices. Our whole team gathered in the conference room once the campaign wrapped to discuss making these changes permanent. Everyone agreed unanimously that the blind first rounds and behavior standards had created the best casting experience we'd ever had and should become the foundation of Eden Laurent going forward. I walked straight to my office after the meeting and pulled the stained dress from the closet where I'd stuffed it. The green juice had dried into weird patterns that looked like abstract art. I spread it flat on my desk and called our framing guy who usually handled our campaign prints. He showed up within an hour and measured the dress while I typed up a small plaque on my computer that just said, "The day everything changed." 3 days later, the dress hung on my office wall in a simple black frame. Every person who came in for meetings stopped and stared at it. I'd tell them the story and watch their faces change from confusion to understanding. The dress became this weird symbol around the office. People would bring new hires to see it and explain what we stood for. 6 months passed faster than I expected. One morning, Amelia walked into my office holding a stack of papers. Anna, Krista, and Louise had finished their professional development training. They'd completed anger management courses and workplace behavior workshops. Their certificates came with letters from their instructors saying they'd shown real growth. The three of them had reapplied for our spring collection, which was smaller than the main campaign, but still a good opportunity. I read through their new applications, which included personal statements about what they'd learned. Anna wrote about understanding how competition had turned her cruel. Krista talked about learning to support other women instead of tearing them down. Louise admitted she'd been so focused on success, she'd forgotten basic kindness. We decided to give them a chance on the smaller campaign. When we called them, they cried on the phone and promised they'd prove we made the right choice. The main campaign launched 2 weeks later. The Times Square billboard went up at midnight and people started posting photos immediately. Every fashion magazine ran our ads showing the models laughing together and helping each other with poses. The behind-the-scenes video went viral with 5 million views in the first week. People kept commenting about how different it felt from normal fashion content. Sales went crazy from day one. We sold out of 3 styles in the first weekend. Barney's had to reorder twice in the first month. The warmth between the models and the photos made people actually want to buy the clothes. Fashion bloggers wrote pieces about how kindness was the new trend. Other brands started calling Celine asking about our casting process. Within 3 months, Versace announced new behavior standards for their shows. Gucci started doing blind first rounds for castings. Even smaller brands began adding kindness clauses to their contracts. Models started treating each other better at castings because they knew brands were watching. I sat in my office one afternoon looking at the framed dress while reading an article about the industry changes. We hadn't just fixed our own company. We'd actually helped change fashion culture itself. All right, that's all from me today. Thanks for sticking with me and letting me throw all my questions out there. Until next time, stay curious. Like the video, it helps more than you think.